please be seated. Mr. Mahmood, I remind you the oath that you took yesterday remains in force, of course, until you complete giving your evidence.
Yes, sir.
We'll sit until about 11:30. We'll take a 10-minute break then. Mr. Sethi.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr. Mahmood, yesterday we were dealing latterly with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority issue, the HKMA disagreement that you had with Mr. Law. I took you to a number of documents. Mr. Phoebe, there was one matter that I wanted to take you to, which is a document that I didn't refer to. Now, Mr. Phoebe will give evidence that he recalled speaking to Mr. Law about the matter. And Mr. Law is somebody who, in Mr. Phoebe's opinion, is normally a very placid individual. And yet, firstly, would you agree with that description of Mr. Law? Would that be your
I didn't know Mr.
experience
Law.
of him? No, but your interaction with Mr. Law, do you have any reason to disagree with the defendant's description of him as a placid individual?
It's very difficult to make a judgment on email, and I think I had 2 telephone calls and everything else was on email. So
listen to the question. You say you don't know him well.
I didn't know him at all.
Defendants have given a description of him in their written evidence, and they'll corroborate that orally. Do you have any reason to dispute their characterisation of Mr. Law's personality?
In his written comments, that's all I can judge him on, because I don't know the man. In his written comments, what I read seemed to be unreasonable.
Let me ask you the question one last time. You can choose to answer it if you wish. If you don't, you can tell me you don't want to answer it, but it would be helpful if you did answer the question. You know that senior members who know Mr. Law well have described him as a placid individual. And you said you had not a great deal of interaction with him other than in this dispute, perhaps. But do you have any reason to dispute their characterisation of him as a placid individual?
I'll say again, as I never met the man.
Do you have any reason to dispute, listen to the question, Mr. Phoebe's description of Mr. Law as normally a very placid individual?
I can't speak to their characterisation. I didn't know the man.
Now, Mr. Phoebe will say that despite being a very placid individual, normally, Mr. Law was, on this occasion, in this HKMA disagreement with you, furious with the way in which you had engaged with him. And Mr. Phoebe will say that he cannot recall Mr. Law ever being so angry. There is an email exchange that I wanted to take you to for completeness. If I can ask you to go to page 1245. On the 6th of March 2018, Mr. Cook forwarded to...
Sethi, excuse me, sir. I've got a blank page, 1245. Oh, sorry, you scroll down. I beg your pardon.
Is it 1225 or 1245?
1245. It's the bottom of the page. I think the witness was observing that most of the page is blank towards the top.
Apologies.
At the bottom of the page, on the 6th of March 2018 at 07:59, Mr. Cook forwards an email to Mr. Phoebe that you had sent to Mr. Cook and to Mr. Long the previous day, and that's and the email is set out there. You had complained that Mr. Law had circumvented you and written directly to the GIB business, didn't you?
So this is from March 2018. I would just like to read the correspondence and refresh my memory if I may.
We spoke about it yesterday.
No, but this particular correspondence that you're asking about, am I permitted to read it?
Of course.
Thank you.
So the first point is that you had complained that Mr. Law had circumvented you and written directly to the GIB business, yes?
That's stated, yes.
Yes, in the second paragraph there, I see that. You also objected to Mr. Law's complaint that you had been aggressive. That's right, isn't it?
I disagreed with it, yes.
Yeah. So just so we're clear, Mr. Law had complained that you had been aggressive in your dealings with him, and you were highlighting this in this email to Mr. Long and Mr. Cook, which was then, as I say, forwarded by Mr. Cook to Mr. Phoebe. Let's see what Mr. Cook said to Mr. Phoebe on the 6th of March. He says, "Hi Tom, just an FYI. I am speaking with Adam over the phone this afternoon. I did speak with Shiraz, that's you, after we exchanged emails, but it has still bubbled up again. He also forwarded to Chris, O'Donnell that is, separately as well, on top of copying him into the email to me too." So you obviously weren't party to this communication, but you've seen now since disclosure in this matter with these internal communications what effect and response or reaction was had to the fact that you were choosing to copy in very senior members of compliance. Do you see that?
I've read the email.
Do you understand the do you agree with me that senior members of compliance were disappointed by the manner in which you chose to simply copy in senior compliance, very senior compliance members?
Joel Kipp, who was a peer, was not happy with my approach. And as I said yesterday, I can understand why.
Sorry, you can understand why.
Well, I said that yesterday, yes.
Right.
In terms of Chris O'Donnell, I can't speak to him because I can't see any commentary from him. I saw Tom's response, he wasn't happy with it. So in terms of your question, yes, some of them have expressed they were not comfortable with my approach.
Now, Chris O'Donnell is Mr. Long's line manager, isn't he? He's your line manager's line manager. Yes?
My manager's manager, yes.
So he's even more senior than Mr. Long at the bank. And Mr. de Groot is Mr. O'Donnell's line manager, isn't he?
I don't know.
Well, you can take it from me that he was at the time. So you report to Mr. Long reports to Sir O'Donnell, and O'Donnell reports to de Groot. And that just gives us an indication of who the levels at which you were choosing to engage. Now, let's try and get back to the story. You agreed with me yesterday, I believe, that you had weekly one-to-one meetings throughout most of your time in the Islamic banking compliance role?
Yes, with Mr. Long.
With Mr. Long.
Yes.
In the first half of 2018, you asked Mr. Long for additional headcount, didn't you?
It may have been sooner than that, I can't remember when, but I certainly did ask Mr. Long for additional headcount.
Okay, so it may have been sooner than the first half of 2018. In other words, it may have been at the end of 2017. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I
Must
can't remember the precise date
Okay.
at the time, but I certainly did ask for a headcount.
We won't worry about the precise date just yet, but we're all both in the same ballpark. I think you've suggested that Mr. Long laughed off, in your words, your request. Now, he denies laughing off your request for additional headcount. But he does say that he may have responded with incredulity at your suggestion that you needed more support. That is a more accurate description of his response to your request, isn't it?
I totally disagree.
You see, Mr. Long did not consider that you were in any position of overcapacity in terms of your workload. Do you accept that that was Mr. Long's position in response to your request?
I totally reject that.
Indeed, as I addressed you yesterday, you were not alone in managing the compliance needs of the GIB business, because you had Mr. Long and others also responsible for doing so. And we went through yesterday the GIB's leverage model approach, meaning that you are a support and assistance control function to the business. Now, Mr. Long says on this matter that he suggested to you that you could submit a business case to justify any increased headcount. Do you agree?
He said I would have to do a write-up to send to Singapore, justifying the headcount. I don't know if it's a business case, but yes, to that.
Well, what did you think he meant? If you're saying he said you'd have to do a write-up and request it formally, it's the same thing, isn't it? You had to justify the request in writing.
I agree with the thrust of what you're saying. I don't know what the document was
You
for.
agree with the thrust of what I'm saying, thank you. Next question. You never did submit any written formal request for an increase in headcount, did you, after Mr. Long had told you what you needed to do if you wanted to progress with your request?
Yes, I did.
You certainly didn't inform Mr. Long, your line manager, about any such formal written request, did you, for
I
increased
actually had
headcount?
to submit it to Mr. Long and his BPM, business project manager, or whatever they're called, but his assistant, Adina Cameron, who then had to forward it on to Singapore on my behalf.
So you're saying it did happen?
Oh yes, it did.
And what happened as a result of the
I never heard back anything.
application? Now, Mr. Long says that you said to him that GIB was not particularly diverse. And I think you both agree that you said to Mr. Long that GIB was not particularly diverse. That's right, isn't it?
No, I went further than that, but yes, that was part of the
Let's
conversation.
take this in stages.
Yeah.
Mr. Long says, I think, so you agree that there was a conversation about the diversity of the GIB
There was.
team. Okay? We agreed about that. Mr. Long says that you said to him that GIB was not particularly diverse in that the majority of its personnel were men from Pakistan. Now that was the sum total of your reference to the diversity of the GIB team. That's right, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Now your line manager says that when this matter was discussed with you, he didn't consider the fact that the majority of GIB were Pakistani nationals to be controversial. And do you accept that that was his, when you had this discussion, do you accept that that was his position, his response?
No, it's from a regulatory perspective, lack of diversity from a general compliance
Not
perspective.
look,
So
Mr.
that was
Mr. Limited, please. I'm asking you not about a regulatory perspective. I'm asking about what you saw and heard when you spoke to Mr. Long, your line manager, about this topic. Did you take from that his position was, as a matter of fact, that he did not think it to be a controversial matter?
He did consider it to be a risk and a controversial matter.
A risk and a controversial matter, you say. Okay. Now, he says that the Pakistani market is one of the largest pools for Islamic banking talent, and it is geographically very close to the UAE. You'd agree with those two propositions, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily. No, Pakistan isn't the largest pool of Islamic banking expertise.
I said it was one of the largest
One of
pools for Islamic banking talent. Do you agree with that, Mr. Mahmood?
I agree that it is one of them.
Do you agree that it is geographically very close to the UAE?
I do so.
Thank you. We will proceed a lot more quickly in this fashion. Now, what Mr. Long says his position was that he was mindful that there was a lack of diversity within the GIB team, and he does say that HR were trying to attract a more diverse range of applications for the GIB roles. Now, let me just ask you this. Is it your position that you're not aware of what efforts HR was making at the time to increase the diversity of the GIB team?
I was not aware, no.
Okay, well that's fair. Then we'll hear from the defendant's witnesses as to how they were approaching the matter and their recognition of what was going on. You never complained to Mr. Long that you were being bullied or discriminated against by GIB team members because of your race and or nationality. That's right, isn't it?
No, it's not.
So we're clearly at odds on that matter, and we'll hear from Mr. Long as well and others that you say you may have mentioned such things too. Now, in your weekly one-to-ones, Mr. Long raised with you your approach to communicating with your colleagues, didn't he?
I told you yesterday he did it once in my appraisal.
That is your appraisal. I'm talking about the weekly one-to-one meetings you had week in, week out with Mr. Long. Do you accept that during those meetings, and it's his case that he did it on numerous occasions and repeatedly, but do you accept that during weekly one-to-one meetings, your line manager raised with you in communicating with your colleagues?
Over the 3-year period, not in a problematic sense that you're portraying, so no.
I didn't say problematic sense at all. I was, at this stage, my question to you is very clear. Was the topic of your approach in communicating with your colleagues raised during weekly one-to-one meetings with your line manager? Yes or no?
Over a 3-year period, yes, it would have been discussed.
Thank you. That seems to be a very different answer to the one you gave
No, not at
immediately before then. My question did not change, Mr. Mahmood, but the record will speak for itself and we shall all have access to that. Now, your line manager says, will say in evidence, that it felt like he had to deal with your communication issues, as he describes them, at almost every meeting that he had. That's what it felt like. So he's giving an impression in his witness statement of paragraph 88. That's, over the course of the 3 years, an awful lot of weekly references, isn't it? It's a high frequency, isn't it, Mr. Mahmood? Do you agree?
It's a very high frequency.
Yeah. But your evidence is only mentioned once in your performance appraisal.
In a pejorative, negative sense, yes.
In a pejorative, negative sense? Well, I'm not talking about that at the moment because the bank adopts an approach of constructive criticism and developmental approaches to improving behaviours. So let's lose the word pejorative. If a developmental issue is identified, it is discussed. And let me put it in these terms. Let's not use a language of pejorative. Was it identified repeatedly by your line manager at weekly one-to-one meetings that it was a developmental issue for you?
That never came up in my weekly one-to-one meetings, and it only came up in my 2018 appraisal.
Only came up, you can't be clearer. Well, we have a clear distance between us. I can't seem to fill that gap with you now. Let me make it clear to you though, because I have to put the case to you. And we will see what the contemporaneous documents say, Mr. Mahmood. Mr. Long would say that his message to you was consistent, namely that a confrontational and aggressive approach would make it very difficult for you to build strong relationships with the business and the key stakeholders with which you were concerned. Yeah, which he says was absolutely crucial if you were to operate as an effective compliance function to the business unit. Do you accept that your line manager had cause to, well, let's not say had cause, that he had occasion to bring that to your attention, that issue, in your weekly one-to-one meetings?
Not in the way that you're positioning it now.
He says that he explained to you that a different approach could be taken to make the relevant point and to move forward on the relevant issues without minimising any risk or control aspects. Do you recall him advising you in that way?
Not on a frequent weekly basis, but in my appraisal, yes.
No, we're talking about your weekly one-to-ones at the
No.
moment. We can all read what the appraisal says, Mr. Mahmood. And perhaps that's why you want to simply refer to the appraisal. But I'm talking about your oral weekly one-to-one conversations. He also said to you, didn't he, at weekly one-to-ones, that calls for senior management to challenge the status quo can be pursued in ways that limit confrontation.
No, he didn't.
So we are quite a gulf apart on this issue. It'll be a matter for the court to decide. Let me then move on. We see a phrase, culture of fear, referred to a number of times. And it's mentioned in reference to you, in the context of the approach that you've adopted to your colleagues. Do you recall that phrase, culture of fear?
I remember the phrase.
You see, Mr. Long will say that your propensity to escalate matters quickly when you did not agree with a colleague's point of view resulted in colleagues being in fear of dealing with you. Do you see that, firstly, as a valid observation?
Given that there were very, very, very
in relation to one other matter, I think that you raised about an approval to launch a GIB intranet site. Do you accept that any compliance function could set up their own SharePoint site?
I don't know about the technical pieces of what's required.
Do you at least accept that you did not need any specific approval to be required to, if you wanted to launch a GIB intranet site, you didn't need any approval?
Correct.
Thank you. Just give me a moment. Let me move on to the next scene in the story, and that's your 365 feedback on Suhail Akbar, the COO of GIB. Now, as you understood it at the time, the bank operates a peer review system, doesn't it?
I wasn't aware of it at the time.
And that enables employees to provide feedback about any of their peers, whether they're superior to them or below them. And that's what I'm referring to as a feedback 365 portal. So the feedback process, the feedback 365 portal, online portal, was a peer review system, wasn't it?
Yes.
So you do understand the 365 portal as a peer review system?
I understand, but I wasn't aware of it, is what I said.
I don't understand. What do you mean you weren't aware of it?
So
You utilised it at the time. When you utilised the 365 feedback portal, what did you think? If you didn't think this was a peer review portal, what did you think it was?
I said I was not aware of it when I was told that that's the mechanism I should use to provide peer feedback, as you say. Then I became aware of it and utilised it.
But at the time you utilised it, you were aware of its purpose.
After I was told yes.
Well, the answer is simply yes, isn't it? Now, the feedback forms part, doesn't it, of the bank's annual appraisal process. Do you agree?
I don't know.
Really?
No, I don't know.
You don't know that the 365 feedback, 365 feedbacks inform the bank's annual appraisal processes for individuals?
So I'm not a HR expert.
You don't need to be.
Can I answer, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of the bank's HR processes. I was told that I was surprised that you could make this kind of feedback in the middle of the year. How that was managed by the bank thereafter, in terms of whether it formally became part of the appraisal process or whether it was a one-off thing that was dealt with by HR, I don't know. I'm not a HR expert.
Mr. Mahmood, you fully understood what a 365 feedback submission was, and you fully understood the consequences of it, didn't you?
I understood it was a peer-to-peer feedback mechanism, yes.
Now, in the bank, as I understand it, they call it P3, and I think it's the three Ps representing pay, performance, and potential. Yes?
No, I disagree with that, sir, because for me, the 365 feedback is a one-off mechanism. The P3 is an annual review, is my understanding.
And you, telling this court, you did not think that a peer review feedback in the 365 would have any consequences for a subsequent appraisal? Is that what you're telling this court?
No, I'm saying it may have done. I'm not a HR expert.
No. What, at the time, you knew, didn't you, that submitting this could have an impact on Mr. Suhail's annual performance appraisal? You knew that, didn't you?
I'd been in the organisation 18 months.
Yes or no?
I wasn't certain of it, no.
Wasn't certain
No.
of it. Did you think it likely?
I didn't really give it much thought, to be honest.
Were you reckless as to what the consequence of this action would be, if you didn't give it much thought?
No, because I was instructed to use the mechanism, and so I followed instructions.
Well, we'll see what the substance of your complaints was in a moment. Now, in around June of 2018, you informed your line manager that you intended to submit feedback about Mr. Akbar, didn't you?
No, I didn't inform him. We
disagree even about this?
Yeah, because he was the one that told me to go and find out what was the best way to deal with the problems that we were experiencing with Mr. Akbar. I discussed it with Mr. Phoebe and Mr. Gilbert whilst in Singapore. Told Mr. Long that they proposed 365 as the most appropriate mechanism to tackle the issues, and he agreed that that's the way it should be tackled.
Well, let's see what Mr. Long will actually say in evidence. He's going to give evidence to this court that he told you when you came to him to say that you intended to submit feedback about Mr. Akbar. He told you that if you were going to do that, then you should warn Mr. Sheikh, the CEO of GIB, in advance and clear the feedback with him. So let's just pause for a moment on that. Do you agree
Mr. Long,
that Mr. Long told you, instructed you to do that?
Ms. Long certainly told me to let Mr. Sheikh know that the 3-6 feedback was being made.
In advance?
Yes, in advance.
That was something you did not do.
I disagree, I do.
It was your responsibility, wasn't it, to cultivate good relations with the GIB business unit? Fundamental part of your job.
It was, as I said yesterday, one of the many responsibilities of my job.
And providing feedback about a senior member, the COO of the management team in that business unit that you're meant to be supporting, necessarily had to be done sensitively, didn't it?
I agree.
Now, on the 28th of August 2018, you submitted your feedback about Mr. Akbar via that bank's Feedback 365 portal. We see the submission at page 1580. Could you go to that? So I believe what you did here was that you submitted it to the relevant email, general email address for these things, and then that portal forwarded the 365 feedback to Mr. Akbar, copying in Mr. Sheikh. That's your understanding, isn't it?
I can't recall if I had to log on to a portal like the employee portal as it says. I don't think it was an email. I think I might have had to go onto a system. But yes, I submitted the 3-6 feedback, whatever the bank's mechanism was.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, you did it, we say, without speaking to Mr. Akbar in advance,
Mr. Akbar.
and Mr. Sheikh, and all I'm saying at the moment is, it comes to Mr. Akbar and Mr. Sheikh's attention at this point, on the 28th of August 2018 at 17:53, when they get notification that you've lodged this 365 feedback, yes?
I agree with Mr. Akbar, but not with Mr. Sheikh. He was told about this in advance.
Now, perhaps we can we'll take a moment to remind ourselves of what the 365 peer review says. Judge, are you very familiar?
No, I'm not. I'm just reading it now.
It'd be an appropriate moment, I think, to digest it. It's a detailed feedback. In relation to Mr. Sheikh's awareness of your 365 feedback before you submitted it, we know what the instruction was. You agreed with me, your line manager had instructed you to inform Mr. Sheikh, Mr. Sheikh, in advance and to clear the feedback with him. We agreed on that, didn't we?
No, he told me to inform Mr. Sheikh. He didn't tell me to clear the feedback with him.
I see. Well, and is that because you wish to conveniently say now that I did tell him of the fact that I was to submit a 365 feedback about Mr. Akbar, but I didn't inform or consult with him about the content of 365 feedback? This is you and Mr. Sheikh. Is that right? Is that your position?
Mr. Long's instruction was to let him know. I let him know.
Okay. We disagree on that, but I think let's just try and agree on the facts that we might at least be able to agree on, and that is that you did not inform Mr. Sheikh of the content of your 365 feedback, or the nature of it, before sending it.
Mr. Sheikh did not see the content, or was not aware of the content before I submitted.
Or the nature of it.
About the nature, I told him I was going to submit feedback. I can't remember if we discussed the nature of it. I can't remember.
Telling someone you're going to submit feedback is just telling someone you're going to be writing a review on another colleague. You did not give Mr. Sheikh any indication whatsoever that this was going to be an extremely negative feedback on Mr. Akbar, did you?
Mr. Sheikh was very casual.
Did you? Answer the question, if you will.
I cannot recall, but I don't think I did, but I honestly can't recall.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me put this to you. Would you agree that your feedback was extremely critical of Mr. Akbar's conduct and performance?
Fair but critical is how I would describe it.
Is the answer yes? You were very critical, weren't you, of Mr. Akbar's conduct and capability?
I was critical of Mr. Akbar's conduct.
Very critical.
That's a degree I
Let me even suggest to you extremely, Mr. Mahmood, extremely critical. Do you not even agree with that characterisation of the content, which we can all read for ourselves, of your 365 feedback on Mr. Akbar?
Now, if you want me to answer that, give me a chance to read it again, because I haven't read it for a few years.
Few years?
Well, when was it submitted?
A few years.
Well, let's look.
But now is certainly the time to refresh your memory, Mr.
Yeah.
Mahmood. I'm
So can
sorry,
I-
I should perhaps not express my surprise, but please do. Yes, absolutely refresh your memory about the content of it. Please do. Yes. agree that your feedback was extremely critical of Mr. Akbar's conduct and capabilities?
I'll go with very critical, the one you put earlier.
Okay. But you needed to read it after some years in order to answer that question in this case. Okay. Do you accept that it was written in a harsh tone?
No, I don't.
Do you accept that it was going to be very difficult for Mr. Akbar to digest?
I can't comment as to Mr. Zapcycle's digesting.
It's a question relating to some level of emotional intelligence, Mr. Mahmood. Do you accept that when Mr. Akbar receives this out of the blue, you knew what the reaction would be, didn't you?
Yeah, it would have been difficult for him to have read that, yes.
Thank you. Do you agree that there is an absence of constructive feedback to balance the negative aspects in what is meant to be a 365 feedback exercise, Mr. Mahmood? No constructive feedback in this document. Do you accept that?
Constructive, what do you mean by that?
Positive. Developmental.
There's nothing
Forward-looking.
Nothing positive there.
Nothing positive. Nothing developmental and forward-looking in terms of next steps to improve relations.
I agree.
So it's just a negative critique at this stage. We agree on that, don't we?
I think it's an accurate description.
No one's talking about accuracy, Mr. Mahmood. You do understand the question. We all know how articulate you are.
I wouldn't say it was negative, I'd say it was accurate. You call it negative, I call it accurate.
Didn't ask you about accuracy though, did I? Is it negative?
Factual and negative.
Do you have problems with that question?
No, I'm just trying to understand with my mind how best to answer. So yeah, I would say yes, it was not positive feedback about Mr. Akbar.
That's
so
how
it was negative.
that's how you propose to answer, but that's fine.
It was negative.
It's a choice that you have as to how you wish to give your evidence. Now, in a 365 document, there are sections. You have the first section, overall comment, and you've just reminded yourself of the content of that. There is, I won't read it out because it's lengthy, but it's full of very negative, critical comments about the COO's conduct and capabilities, isn't it? Full of it in your overall comment. Let's see what you have to say under the heading of positive feedback. Next page. Positive feedback. Do you want to remind yourself again what it says there?
What page are we talking about?
Next page, 1581.
I can't see. Oh, the positive feedback.
So here you choose to populate the box headed positive feedback. And guess what my next question is going to be? Where is the positive feedback?
It's not there.
Again, we can read for ourselves what you say, and perhaps more importantly, how you said it. Under the heading of positive feedback in a peer review document. Let's look at the next section, developmental feedback. Again, I think you accepted a moment ago in the general answer, there is no positive, forward-looking, developmental next steps, are there?
I agree.
You agree? Thank you. That's fair of you to do so. Now, throughout the course of September 2018, your line manager had a number of discussions with Mr. Sheikh, Mr. de Groot, HR, about how to deal with this grenade. Perhaps that's the emotive description I'm inserting there. That's my contribution to this matter. But you throw this Exocet missile into the room, and it has consequences. It has to be dealt with. And we see how you dealt with it, how you chose to instigate the matter, in the terms and the manner in which you did. And we'll hear from management as to what their reaction was. We've accepted, established rather, that Mr. As COO of the business unit that you're meant to be supporting, Mr. Akbar was a very senior member of GIB management, wasn't he?
He was indeed.
And let me hide nothing in the point I'm going to be focusing on. I'm not going to be focusing on, and I don't think most people are interested about the substance. There may be truth to some criticisms you have of Mr. Akbar. The relevance is of the manner of your communication with colleagues. Okay? Just so we're clear, we're focusing on the right point. Now, on the 20th of September 2018, you sent to Mr. de Groot and to your line manager, and bearing in mind, remembering that Mr. de Groot is your line manager's line manager's line manager, at page 2130. I'll ask you to go to that.
So what's the number again, Mr.
2130. We see an email there to Mr. Adam, Mr. Long and Mr. de Groot, and this is you attaching further correspondence and commentary. And in fact, I think you sent two emails on this occasion. The one is at page 2130 and the other is at page 1682. I'm sorry that they are many pages apart in the bundle, but Judge, the other one is at 1682.
Thank you.
And what you're doing here is that you are, in addition to the very detailed written feedback we've seen, you attach, which you said was supplemental to the 365 feedback you had provided. Yes?
No.
Please find attached, this is top of page 2130, please find attached correspondence which supplements the 365 feedback provided in respect of Sahel Akbar. So the answer is yes, isn't it? Why is it no?
Because the inference is that...
Forget the inference, answer the question, Mr. Mahmood. This is a very straightforward question.
Okay. Go on. What was the question?
I'm sorry to pause at this point, but the exercise is simply one where I'm required to ask you questions to put our client's case, And your job is simply to answer the question put. Your counsel will have an opportunity to re-examine on anything he deems of relevance and importance within the rules. Do you understand?
Mr. Sessi, I'm really sorry, and really I'm not trying to be difficult.
Well, if we can't proceed on the most basic of obvious matters, it is difficult to then move at pace.
I have the utmost respect for you. I'm really not trying to be difficult, but in terms of some of this, you're making me refer to lots of documents, and sometimes I do need. My fault. I should take my time and read them before responding. If that's
Mr. Mahmood, if you need time to read a document before you answer a question, all you need to do is ask for that time, and it will be given to you. But could I just say, when you're asked a question, it's important to listen carefully to the question you're asked, and your role is to answer it. Your role is not to argue a case or to provide support for the answer that you've given. Just answer it. You've got a very good lawyer here representing you. He will argue your case. There's no need for you to argue your case from the witness box. Your role in the witness box is simply to give evidence, not present argument.
Professor, apologies.
So you had the initial 365 feedback plus these 2 emails on the 20th of September with all the annexures that were attached to it. We can see the volume of documentation that you provide here, can't we? There's appendices which go on for many, many pages. This is all in the context of the 365 feedback. You then, on the 22nd of September, sent another email which attached further documentation, which you said supported the 365 feedback you'd provided. And that's at page 1731.
Okay, Mr. Setti, just before we leave
Yes.
page 2130,
Yes.
it refers to attached correspondence, but then if I go to page 2133, that is Appendix 10, which seems to be something else relating to his 2017 P3. So where would I find the correspondence that was attached to that email?
I'm just taking instructions on getting your honour the page numbers.
And while we're talking about page numbers, you gave me another page number in the 1700s that I missed. Can you give me that again?
I think it was in the 1600s actually.
You gave me 1682, but then you were referring to 1700 and something, I think.
No.
It's 1682, is it?
The 2 emails on the 20th of September, one was at 2130 and the second email was at the 1682. And then, the third email on the 22nd of September was 1731.
That's the number I was looking
That's
for,
the one.
thank you. Now, again, looking at 1682, that doesn't seem to have the attachments either.
Mm.
1731 doesn't appear to have the attachments either.
So 1701 to 1720.
Mr. Setti, we don't have to do this on the run.
No, I think we need to.
I think it'd be better if you could just give me a document setting out where I find the annexes to those 3 emails.
What's happened is, if it helps, I think this is part of the documents that are actually out of sequence in the public.
All right. Okay, thank you.
It's often the case, Your Honour, in these matters when there are attachments upon attachments to emails.
Right,
But what we'll do in the
Just give
break,
me a note.
in the next appropriate break, I'll take instructions and provide a definitive
Thank you.
list of the page references for each attachment to the emails that I've taken Your Honour and the witness to.
Thank you.
I think we actually may just have it now, so I might just deal with it
All
at this juncture,
certainly.
if that suits.
No, it's just because it's going to be a
Oh, I see. Yeah. So, yes, Your Honour, if you go to page 2130, you'll see that the claimant says in the second paragraph, due to size limits, the emails relating to items 1 to 7 of the table below will follow in a separate email, which I will send immediately after this one. And if you go to...
But the first paragraph says, please find attached correspondence, which supplements.
Yes, I think...
So the entire thing is 4948.
if we can go to 4948, what we get at 4948 is the entirety. And perhaps a page reference should be 4948 through to 5219. Your Honour, are you at 4948?
Yeah, I am.
And you just need to then scroll on right through to 5219.
Now, does that cover all three emails, or does that just cover the email that you took the witness to at 213?
That's a good question. At the moment, I understand that just covers the first supplementary email.
All right.
And I'm told it may also include part 3.
So it's part 1 and part 3.
And then the next page references are 5220, which follow on from the 5219, so 5220. So email number 3 is at page 5220, and then that goes right through to page 5293. And then you see the scale of the attachments to email number 3.
So 4948 to 5219, you said that's parts 1 and part 3. Is that parts 1 and part 2, is it?
It's just...
5219. Is it what? If you go to 7942.
That's just part 1, I'm told.
All right. And part 3 goes from 5220 to 5293, so we're now
I
missing part 2.
So from number 13 down at 7942.
I see. Very helpfully, he says, in the index to the trial bundle, at page 7942,
Yes.
you have a description of the 3 sets of attachments, I believe.
Let's see.
From item 13.
Yeah, so 13 and 14. 13 down to 17.
Yeah. So items 13 to 17 are part 1.
Yes.
18 to 21.
18 to 21 are part 3.
is the elusive part 2.
Yes.
Or perhaps you can tell me about that after the break.
And that we will take a moment to
Yes.
check.
That's okay.
It's the 61. Is it 61? No, 162 was. Now, Mr. Mahmood, we know from Mr. Long that Mr. de Groot had asked him to forward the feedback to HR, and it landed with Ruwani Ebel, HR business partner for CFCC, who then looked into that matter. Now, it's our case that you are giving very critical and harsh feedback about a very senior member of GIB management. You presumably do not agree with that, is that right?
I was giving 365 feedback on...
No, listen to my words. Very critical and harsh feedback about a very senior member of GIB management, correct or not?
I was giving critical feedback on...
Yes or no?
Critical, yes.
The critical part you accept, the rest you do not. I understand. You nodded your head.
Oh, sorry.
You answered the question for the record.
Apologies, Mr. Sessi. I accept critical, harsh, no.
All right. And you accept that this created an extremely sensitive situation?
It did.
Do you accept that your line manager's description that it was not tactful?
I wholly reject that.
What were you hoping to achieve by sending this 365 feedback in the terms and the manner in which you did? What were you hoping to achieve by it? What was your purpose, Mr. Mahmood? Explain.
To improve the governance culture within Islamic banking.
And that's the way in which you chose to do it?
That's the way in which I was instructed to do it.
The words are yours, aren't they, on the 365 feedback and the subsequent emails?
The words are mine and Mr. Long's.
Mr. Long didn't write any of the 365 feedback,
He
did he?
reviewed every single
Mr.
word.
Long did not write any of the words in your 365 feedback. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
That's incorrect. He modified some aspects of it.
You did not, as we know, run the feedback past Mr. Sheikh in advance in terms of its terms. We know you created an extremely sensitive situation. You think it was tactful when your line manager thinks the opposite.
No, sir.
Yes?
What I meant by that, and let me clarify, apologies if I misled you. What I meant by that was I reject Mr. Long's suggestion that it was not tactful in the sense that he reviewed it. For him to say it's not tactful, I just
Well,
find it
I'm
bizarre.
asking you about whether it's tactful or not tactful. I'm not asking you about any review at the moment.
My apologies.
So do you agree that it was not tactful?
The content of it? No, it was very direct. It wasn't tactful at all.
Very direct. do you agree that the feedback process should be as contemporaneous to the issues that give rise to the dispute, or any kind of complaint that you're seeking to make should be contemporaneous to when the dispute arises? Do you think that's a good way of proceeding when it comes to making complaints about somebody's conduct and capability?
It wasn't necessarily a complaint, it was feedback. And contemporaneous...
Tell me the distinction you draw between this was not a complaint, this was feedback. So just explain to the judge what you mean by that.
It was a feedback tool, I was providing feedback. If I was lodging a complaint, I would have used a complaint mechanism.
But within the terms of your feedback, it's entirely complaining, isn't it? About his conduct and capabilities.
It's setting out the facts, and that's the feedback.
Now, this was the first time that such a senior person was receiving strong feedback from you in this manner. Do you accept that it would have been more tactful to approach it in other, less formal ways, not to escalate it to a 365 feedback submission?
I was instructed to go this way, so I don't know if any other ways may have been more tactful, but that's not what I was instructed to do.
Mr. Long did not instruct you to send this document. It was your idea to send a 365 feedback.
I disagree.
Now, we were dealing with the issue of your line manager instructing you, giving you a management direction to warn Mr. Sheikh of the forthcoming feedback. And you accept that he asked you to warn Mr. Sheikh, but you said you did tell Mr. Sheikh of the fact that you were about to submit a feedback.
Yes.
But when your manager is telling you to warn Mr. Sheikh that something like this is imminent, did you not understand that to mean, and this is just to develop your evidence, that you at least told him of the fact that 365 feedback was going to come? You understood, didn't you, that the instruction was that you needed to give Mr. Sheikh advance notice that negative feedback was about to land on his desk in relation to one of his subordinates? That was the point of Mr. Long advising you and indeed instructing you to forewarn Mr. Sheikh, wasn't it? That was the point of it. There was no other point to it, was there?
It was as casual as let him know, and I let him know. Mr. Sheikh really wasn't interested in the substantive content of the feedback.
We'll hear from Mr. Sheikh in response, in dealing with your answer there, Mr. Nabil. He was very concerned with it. You see, your line manager is going to tell the court that he was troubled and unhappy with the fact that you had not followed his instruction to forewarn Mr. Sheikh. It was not a casual instruction. He made a point of telling you, if you're going to do it, forewarn Mr. Sheikh, correct?
I refer you to what I said earlier. He said let him know, and I did.
Now, your line manager was sufficiently concerned about you not following his instructions that he asked Mr. Phoebe and Mr. O'Donnell for their opinion on your conduct. Can I ask you to go to page 1598? What one sees at page 1598, email from Adam Long, 24 September 2018 at 13:07 to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Phoebe.
And just read all of it, please.
Yes, if you're not familiar with it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So your line manager is saying to even more senior individuals that he's seeking advice from, giving them the feedback, and says it has spurred many discussions between myself, Rehan Sheikh, Emmanuel de Groot and HR since the end of August. This is now at least 3 weeks into September. And he says this, he says, I appreciate some of the feedback is quite critical and arguably harsh. I have discussed this with Shiraz, and I am not happy that he did not run this through Rehan Sheikh, that is, before releasing it, as I had requested, to ensure Rehan was not surprised, stroke ambushed. Now, Mr. Mahmood, you weren't party to this communication. But clearly, your line manager is going out of his way now to indicate contemporaneously that he had instructed you to forewarn, and forewarn is my words, forewarn Mr. Sheikh, so that Mr. Sheikh would not be surprised or ambushed, to use Mr. Long's words. You accept, don't you, that that was the instruction you were given?
I accept what you say in terms of he's going out of his way to let his superiors know what he did contemporaneously, because quite frankly, what he's saying there is not true. Other than what I said earlier, he said let him know.
So, Mr. Long is lying here to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Phoebe. That's your evidence, is it?
My evidence is that what is stated in that email is not accurate.
No, let's be very clear about this.
Yeah.
You can't just say that. We need to know what is not accurate about it. So, when in that second paragraph, he says, I'm not happy that he did not run this through Rehan before releasing it, brackets, as I had requested. Now,
That is not true.
You're saying that is a lie?
I'm saying that is not true.
Not true. And he said to ensure Rehan was not surprised ambushed. So you're saying that's not true?
That second bit.
Yes, that second paragraph.
So if we break it down, that whole sentence, with regards to the content of the feedback, is not true. With regards to letting Mr. Sheikh know, so he wasn't surprised, that's accurate. So I did let him know, but I was not instructed to let him read the content in advance.
I see. So we may be getting somewhere from this point. So you accept that the purpose of the instruction you were given by your line manager was to forewarn Mr. Sheikh that something was about to happen and land on his desk, yes?
The 365 feedback was going to be.
Yeah.
Your Honour, I don't like objecting, but I'm concerned here that the witness is being asked a series of very confusing questions. In particular, he's being asked in the question that's just been asked, that he agrees with the purpose, that the purpose was. The question is that a question about his knowledge or divination of Mr. Long's state of mind at the time? Is that a question about what was actually said by Mr. Long? And I do have some concerns about this.
Well, if you have no concerns, the point of the question is what he understood by the need. What was the need to forewarn?
Perhaps just clarify whose state of mind you're asking about. So that if you're asking about Mr. Mahmood's state of mind, that's one thing. If
No,
you're asking
only about Mr. Mahmood's state of mind.
All right.
You understood when Mr. Long said to you, before you do this, inform Mr. Sheikh, that the purpose of that, you understood at the time, was so that Mr. Sheikh would not be surprised or ambushed. Correct or not correct?
That's correct.
So what did you say then to Mr. Sheikh to ensure that you followed that instruction?
I was in his office. I told him that I was going to be putting forward some 365 feedback. He wasn't really interested. He goes, yes, it will help him improve. And that was it. Pretty much. Moved on to other things.
Your answers are on the record, thank you. And that's helpful. I'm grateful for the interjection, that's assisted. So, your line manager asks his superiors, these other individuals, Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Phoebe. At the end of this email, he says, I appreciate I may be too close to this. He says, I would really appreciate it if you could take a look and let me know if you think the feedback is over the line or not. So your line manager was seeking advice on whether the content of your feedback amounted to misconduct or not, didn't it? That's what this is saying, isn't it?
What are you trying to make? What are you trying to get from me? I don't understand.
You understand, don't you, that at the time, your line manager considered that your conduct in the manner in which you sent your feedback and in the content of your feedback might have been over the line. Now, we can deal with Mr. Long as to what he means by that, but I'm telling you that it's from the University of the Obvious. That what he means by that is that have you done something wrong in terms of your behaviours, Mr. Mahmood? And he is seeking advice from these more senior members of management. Do you see that? That's what's happening here, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not ambiguous.
No.
So you accept that. Thank you. Grateful. Let's move on then. Look at the email at the top of the page, 24 September 2018 at 12:19. Mr. Phoebe's response. He says, in short, very supportive of the feedback, especially if you observe similar, brackets, and you should add your voice to Shiraz's. So if he's supportive of it, he should add his voice to yours. However, and separate, continued indications of some maturity gaps with Shiraz and need for further coaching. So do you see that the responses in relation, there are two parts to this. One is that there may be truth in what you're saying and it needs attention if your line manager agrees with it and wants to put his name to it as well. But the second point, distinctly, because it's a separate point as said here, Mr. Phoebe considers that there is continued indications in this 365 feedback of some maturity gaps with you and a need for you to have further coaching. Do you see that?
I see that.
So Mr. Phoebe was aware, it seems, that you had had some coaching and you needed further coaching. And this is because, Mr. Mahmood, this matter of your communication style and habit here, as it was forming, or had formed, was the subject of regular one-to-one meetings with your line manager, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
Now, let's, still on this subject, on the 30th of October 2018, we know that Miss Ebel from HR sent an email to Mr. de Groot informing him that the employee relations and shared investigative services teams had reviewed the matter. That is at page 1700. And judge if that can be read. And what they're suggesting is that what needs to happen here is a peer review process, aren't they?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Long says then that at this time he recalls having a discussion with you about your feedback, and that he had explained to you that your success in your role as GIB compliance depended on you developing a constructive working relationship with GIB management. You accept that he had a conversation with you at around this time after your submission of the 365?
I can't recall what date my appraisal for that year was, but that, as I said before, that's the only conversation we had regarding that kind of particular content that you just referenced. So no, there was no conversation as a result of this particular feedback.
All right.
That
So,
as you described it.
so your evidence to the court is that the feedback which was sent in September of 2018 did not result, despite contemporaneous evidence we're looking at, did not result in your line manager discussing the subsequent, discussing your feedback with you after you submitted it.
100% it did not.
You're 100%.
Yes.
That's very clear. Thank you. So your case is this grenade that you had launched. There was silence on the subject between you and your line manager.
No, I didn't say that.
So he did talk to you about the after you submitted the feedback.
Not about
it?
my approach, but about what happened here with HR, etc. Yes, we discussed it. He told me about what that had resulted in, but he never.
So your line manager's having a conversation with you, saying that HR are looking into this.
No, he's not saying that. Would you like me to say what he's saying?
We need to cut through this. Is your evidence to the court that despite what we see here about your line manager's written expressed concerns about the manner in which you proceeded in relation to 365, you're saying that he did not raise that issue, the manner, with you?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Right. That's your evidence.
Yes.
We'll hear from him. Is it your case now that having seen the internal communications to which you were not a party, that your line manager did not actually believe that you might have done wrong at the time,
He didn't believe.
that you might have stepped over the line. We've seen the email. What's your position? I mean, you now, taking a more mature, reflective view on this, you can see what the contemporaneous documents say, unless your case is it's a fabrication, in which case say so.
I would say that Mr. Long is presenting himself in the most positive way that he can to his superiors.
That's your evidence in
Yes.
relation to what he was thinking at the time.
Absolutely.
This was all exploding. All right. That's your answer. See, he says that he said to you that it was extremely important that you improved your communication with your colleagues so that you did not alienate the business for which you were meant to be responsible as a support control function. And you're saying, no conversation to that effect after I submitted the 365.
No, 100% not.
And you were not informally reprimanded, as you say, by Mr. DeGroof, were you?
Yes, I was.
The position was quite clear. It was your line manager's position to address the issue with you as a developmental matter, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
And insofar as Mr. Akbar was concerned, it was his line manager's responsibility to deal with Mr. Akbar's performance, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
I'll leave it to you to pick a convenient time, Mr. Setti.
I was thinking precisely the same, Your Honour. And I believe that makes sense at this juncture.
Yes, all right. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right.
Same rules apply, Mr. Mahmood, not to speak to anybody during the break.
was helpful. Thank you. Very helpful.
Be seated, please. Mr. Setti.
For the record, Judge, I have just a correction in my line of line of questioning, and that was when I put to Mr. Mahmood that shortly after the submission of the 365, he was spoken to by Mr. Long, his line manager, about the manner of his behaviour, and the question is it's the same question, but actually it's Emmanuel de Groot who, according to his evidence, spoke to the claimant at that time. And you'll recall the answer to my questioning was 100% it was not. Mr. Long did not do it. So do you accept, Mr. Mahmood, that Mr. de Groot, soon after you submitted your 365, spoke to you?
I do.
Thank you. And he will give evidence that he had a discussion with you about your feedback, and he explained to you that the point that I put you to earlier, but let me just put it to you now formally. Mr. de Groot explained to you at this time that your success in your role as GIB compliance depended on you developing constructive working relationships with the GIB management team. That's right, isn't it?
I can't recall off the top of my head. What I took from that conversation was something else. But honestly, Mr. Setti, I can't recall, but he may have said that, but that's not what my memory of that.
That's okay. You can only tell us what you know or recall clearly. It was. He also said to you, he says, that it was extremely important that you improved your communication with your colleagues so that you did not alienate the business for which you were responsible. Do you agree that he said that to you, or do you have any reason to disagree that he said that to you?
I find that highly unlikely, but again, I can't recall specifically. That's not the main thing I remember from that conversation.
Well, he recalls it. He says he was advising you with a view to helping you in your role, and this, I think, do you accept that he was, let me use the word, the conversation that he had with you was a coaching conversation about your, the way in which you were communicating with colleagues?
There was one where he was quite upset, and he was what I would call it a reprimand rather than a coaching session.
I think you called it an informal reprimand. He says he did not reprimand you, whether informally or formally. We clearly disagree on that. But do you accept that the subject matter of the conversation that you had was about your communication style or manner
No,
as a result of the 365 feedback?
it was about the 365 feedback and the way in which it was delivered, but
The way, so let's develop this, the way in which it was delivered. So, so the way in which you communicated your feedback was the subject of this conversation with Mr. de Groot.
I'm not quite clear. When I say the way it was delivered, he wasn't so much talking about the content of it.
We'll hear from Mr. de Groot, shall we? We clearly disagree. Now, let's see if we can make further headway in the story. We're now moving on to the 2018 performance appraisal and pay review matter. Now, you understood, didn't you, that the bank's appraisal process at the time was known as P3, those
Yes.
3 Ps I spoke about earlier. And you understood at the time that an employee's performance is assessed by reference to a performance matrix. Yes?
Yes.
And that performance matrix measures two things. Firstly, achievement against specific performance objectives. Yes?
That's correct.
Secondly, adherence to and demonstration of the bank's valued behaviours. And that incorporates a review of risk, control and conduct issues. Do you agree?
I agree.
Do you also agree that the assessment of an employee's performance was done and is still done by way of self-assessment, as well as assessment by the line manager, as well as feedback from key stakeholders?
Yes, I accept that.
And what happens is the employee is then given an overall alphanumeric P3 rating, and that P3 rating is used to determine the variable compensation for that year and any increase in the fixed remuneration for the following year.
I agree.
All of this is unsurprising. It's how most employers and banks operate. And just so we're clear, the P3 rating system works as follows, doesn't it? There's a numerical rating and an alpha rating. The numerical rating measures performance against objectives, and it's from 1 to 5, 1 being exceptional, then 2 very good, 3 good, 4 improvement required, 5 unacceptable. And a letter, an alpha letter is, alphabetic letter is assigned to performance against the valued behaviours. A, you're a role model. B, mostly. C, generally. D, sometimes. And E, rarely. We agree with this. We all understand at least what the ratings mean. You understood also at the time, didn't you, that variable remuneration awards in any given year turns on a number of factors. And they would include individual performance, yes?
Correct.
It would also include the team performance, your team's performance.
I have no reason to dispute that.
It would also be affected by the business unit's performance
Agreed.
and by the group performance.
Agreed.
Also in relation to the stated values, valued behaviours and sound risk management principles that need to be complied with.
Agreed.
And Mr. Long will give evidence that he was issued with and understood the guidance that he was following in relation to assessing performance, and in particular your performance. Now, your first performance review took place in 2017, didn't it?
No.
No?
No.
Now I ask you to turn to page 2134. This is your self-assessment for your 2017 performance appraisal, isn't it?
Yes.
So do you wish to correct your previous answer?
No.
Now, in your 2017 self-assessment, perhaps judge if this document can be read.
Sorry. Have you read it, Mr. Mahmood?
Yes, sir.
Now, as part of this self-assessment in 2017, you gave yourself a 1A rating, didn't you?
that's in the document then, yes.
Sorry, you are familiar with the document. Do we need a moment to
in terms
reread
of-
it?
I've read the summary, but if it's in my 1A, fine. I've only got the
Yeah.
selection of 1A rating, yes.
Well,
I did. Sorry, Mr.
This doesn't come as a surprise to you. You know full well 'cause it's in the evidence and it's in the witness statements and it's an issue in relation to your performance appraisal processes.
Not disputed, apologies.
Right, so your very first performance appraisal in 2017, and as part of the self-assessment exercise, you considered it sensible and appropriate to award yourself or self-assess yourself as 1A, meaning exceptional performance, can't get any better in terms of performance, and A, meaning a role model in that role. Yes?
Well, I disagree with the very first part.
Well, 1 is exceptional and A is role model.
Your first part of your statement where you said this was my first assessment, P3 assessment, it wasn't. So I disagree with that component, but yes, I did.
Was there a P3 assessment, P3 self-assessment you did in 2017 before this one?
There was one in 2016.
Okay, that's the bit you disagree with. Let's not worry about that. In your 2017, which was presumably your second ever P3 assessment, is that right?
My first as a full-time employee, the one in 2016 was done whilst I was on as a temporary contract.
Okay, let's focus on the 2017. In 2017, you considered yourself to be an exceptional performer and a role model at the very top end of your abilities, or at least for the role. Is that right?
Yes.
How long had you been in this role at this time?
Which role?
In the role that you were self-assessing yourself for?
There were two roles.
Yeah, this role. This role, at the time you completed this 2017 assessment, this is your...
I would have joined, I think it was June or July in
Yes.
2017.
That's the point I'm making. So you understand you've been in the role for 6 months, or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think you fully met all of your, more than met all of your objectives, as it were, because you're self-assessing yourself as 1A. Do you recall what your manager considered was your rating in 2017, in contrast to your self-assessed rating of 1A?
3B or C? 3 something, I think.
3B.
Okay.
Your manager at the time of this self-assessment, you were giving yourself a 1A, your manager was giving you a 3B. Your manager was not Mr. Long, was it? It was Mr. Patel, wasn't it?
No, it was Mr. Long.
You're saying that Mr. Long gave you the 3B rating in 2017, not Mr. Patel?
I joined Islamic Banking in July 2017. My reporting line changed into Mr. Long at the end of the year. He completed my performance review. So yes, Mr. Long gave me that rating.
Okay, that's helpful. Doesn't really matter who it was for present purposes. You were given a 3B rating when you considered yourself to be a 1A rated employee. Okay? In November of 2018, so we'll fast forward a year, you've now been in the role for perhaps some 18 months. You again undertook a self-assessment for your 2018 performance review. How did you rate yourself then on the scale?
It was 1 something, I can't remember.
It was 1A again, wasn't it?
Not unsurprising
Not unsurprising to who?
to me.
Thank you for that, Mr. Lamou, because both in 2017 and in 2018, there's, to put it objectively, some distance between your self-assessment and your manager's assessment of you. Do you agree?
There is some distance.
Significant, meaningful, substantial, material difference. of opinion as to your performance.
I don't think you can use a blanket statement because the gap narrowed in 2018. So if it was substantial in the year 2017 and narrowed, it wouldn't be substantial anymore, would it?
Well, we've seen the difference between a 1A and a 3B in 2017. Let's look at the 2018 because that's the one you complain about, firstly. That's the first of the two performance appraisals you complained about, correct?
Can you refresh my memory? What do you mean by complaint? So,
Well, it's part of your complaint, isn't it, that your manager gave you a
the performance was docked.
a wrong rating in a detrimental rating in 2018. Yes.
I can't remember the substance of the wording I used, but it was because my performance was docked, and the rating wasn't. I didn't think it was fairly reflective.
No, sure. But all I want to establish at the moment is it's one of your complaints
It is, sir. I
to this.
just couldn't remember what the specifics were, but yes, you're right.
Now, what your line manager will say is that in the light of various communication issues involving you, for example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority disagreement and the manner in which you had communicated your 365 feedback, he gave you a rating of 2C. You agree, don't you, that there is a substantial gulf between 1A and 2C?
Which is substantial, 3B or 2C?
Well,
There's a
3B,
gulf.
3B might even be a material difference. But the point here is there is a marked difference, isn't there? A material difference. I just want to see what you can agree with me on as to your self-perception
Yeah,
and your manager's perception.
I agree there's a difference.
A material difference. It's not like, a 1 degree difference. We're talking there is a marked difference in
3B,
2017 and in 2018.
in 3B, I would say it was marked. In 2018, I would say it was less marked. But can I just correct something, please, from one of my earlier responses?
Yes,
Allowed to?
if you want to correct something,
Yeah,
please do.
no, your reference to the 365 and HKMA in terms of my complaint regarding my 2018, it was the fact that my performance was docked because of those reasons, so that was also the substance of my complaint. So I just wanted to clarify.
Well, here you're trying to argue your case. You just need to answer my
Sorry,
question,
I beg your
please.
pardon on that. Didn't mean to.
Thank you. I believe that your 2018 performance rating is set out at page 4759. Can I ask you to go to that? Mr. Long, your line manager, will say that this was entirely his decision. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't know. I don't know what the decision-making process Mr. Long followed was.
So you have no reason to dispute that, correct?
I have no reason to dispute
Thank you.
Mr. Long's.
That's nice and easy. Answers like that, we can move on more quickly. Now, Mr. Long says that a 2C rating is still a strong rating within the scoring framework. It's not necessarily a weak rating.
If he said that, I have no reason to dispute him saying that.
Do you accept that your line manager's rating was a fair and reasonable rating?
No.
Do you accept that he was entitled to come to the rating that he did as your line manager?
Within the parameters of the organisation, as my manager, he had the discretion to make his choice on the rating, yes.
I think your answer is yes, therefore, to my question, isn't it?
Do I think it was a... Yes, he was entitled to, but was it the accurate one? I don't want to argue my case again, but yes, he was entitled to, as Mr. says.
an individual are unhappy or would disagree with their line manager's
You're absolutely right.
assessments, but they don't dispute that the line manager was entitled to come to the view that he did. You don't now, looking at the evidence that we have seen so far at this stage, you don't have any reason to dispute the grade that he decided.
No, I am disputing that. I did complain about this particular reasoning, so
Okay.
that's about wording and language.
Well, I'm asking you now, having digested what evidence there is in the case, in particular the contemporaneous disclosure, contemporaneous documents that have now been disclosed. But you want to persist with your position. Okay, so let's explore that. Looking at the page 4759, we see that the overall rating by the manager is 2, which means very good, and C, which is generally. But you want to say that's a detriment to you, a disadvantage to you, because you deserved higher. That's got to be your position. Yes?
I say that the commentary in there was not reflective of my performance.
Let's see whether it's reflective of reality, Mr. Mahmood. Look at page 4759. And can I just say that I accept that your perception of your abilities may well be very different to your manager's. That is not an issue at the moment. So I'm not interested in your perception. It's your critique of your manager's perception.
Okay.
So, here at 4759, he gives a detailed assessment there. Judge, if the court could read that to itself if it hasn't done so already. Are you familiar with the document, Mr. Mahmood?
I'm reading it again.
You're reading it again? Tell me when you're done.
Yes, sir. I'm done, sir.
Thank you. So let's have a look at the first page. I'm assuming you've now read all that. So on page 4759, in the middle of that narrative, do you see the word status quo on the left-hand side?
Yep.
Right. The following sentence, please, if you can focus on it. Theme of my experience of working with Shiraz and of the stakeholder feedback throughout the year, challenges start with sensible goals and intention, then there's a typo, but need to consider how things are received and unintended consequences. Do you see that?
I do.
Let's look over the page at 4760. So hold on, just before we do, sorry, go to the bottom of the 4759, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The sentence beginning, moving forward. Moving forward into next year, I would like to see Shiraz focus on the following. Leadership. Shiraz should look for more opportunities to lead across the broader function. And just bear with me for 1 minute, Mr. Lee, I beg your
No
pardon.
problems also.
So over the page, at page 4760, at the top of the page, 4 lines down. So moving forward into the next year, he wants you to focus on a number of matters, and he raises 2 points here. 1, consideration of blind spots and self-reflection of different approaches based on stakeholder feedback. See that?
I do.
The other developmental point is better consideration of unintended consequences to challenge and adapt where needed to ensure the actual message / substance becomes the discussion and not the approach surrounding it. Do you see that?
I do.
So all of this is not about whether you're right or wrong. It's about your manner of communicating with your colleagues. Do you see that?
I see what Mr. Long has written. I don't accept it.
You may not accept it, but do you understand his perception as recorded in your 2018 performance appraisal?
I understand his motivation for making those statements.
Do you understand the statements?
I understand the statements.
And you understand that the statements are focusing on the manner of your interaction with colleagues, and that you're a support role, and not necessarily whether you're right or wrong about any particular issue. Do you see that? Do you understand that that's a point he's making, Mr. Miller?
I see the statements. I don't necessarily agree with.
No, it's not about whether you agree with them. Let's assume you disagree with them. Let's just take that out of the equation. You don't agree with what your line manager thinks of you. But I'm trying to understand what it is you understood at the time your line manager thought of you. And what he thought of you was, as written here, that there is a real developmental issue which needed to be recorded in relation to the manner in which you interacted with colleagues. Do you accept that?
I accept that's what he wrote.
You don't accept that that was his genuine belief at the time.
No, I don't.
So when he was writing these things, Mr. Mahmood, he was fabricating his actual belief at the time. Is that your evidence to this court?
I can't speak to his motivation as to whether.
Well, you're saying that what is written here, you believed that he did not believe what he was writing. Is that right?
That's right.
Right. So he's lying.
Your words.
I won't press that further with you, but I think we have your answer. And this is one of the many things, as well as that you say that the 2018 performance rating by Mr. Long was on grounds of nationality. It's issue 10.2. So breaking that down, you're saying that Mr. Long, because you're a British Asian who has relinquished his Pakistani heritage, was moved to, or that caused him to give you the rating that he did. That's your case here, isn't it?
Stakeholder feedback, sir. I'd refer you to. So I can't speak to Mr. Long. There was a motivation there. I believe the stakeholder feedback he received was tainted by the statement you just said.
You accepted a moment ago in evidence that you had no reason to dispute that the decision to rate you in this performance rating was Mr. Long's and Mr. Long's alone. We established that. You've no reason to dispute that.
We also...
So, Mr. Long reached this decision. Are you saying to this court that Mr. Long reached this decision because he was motivated by your being a British Asian who'd relinquished his, or apparently relinquished his Pakistani heritage?
No.
Is that how you're putting the
No,
matter?
not for Mr. Long, no.
Right. So, how is Mr. Long being racist?
In relation
Is it because
to
of your white?
this one,
Is it because you haven't got white skin?
Is it because of... What are you talking about in terms of where's that just popped up from?
Let me tell you where that's popped up from, because your counsel says that if it's not going to be nationality discrimination, we're going to say it's discrimination for not being a Caucasian. So is that the reason why Mr. Long made the decision according to your case? Yes or no?
Stakeholder feedback as to Mr. Long in terms of being an Asian. Yes, in terms of the feedback he received from European colleagues in senior management within compliance, I do think there was an element of discrimination in that feedback. Whether Mr. Long exercised or not, I think he may have done. But that feedback to me was the first time I'd ever come across that in my relationship with Mr. Long. 2018, my performance review hadn't come up before.
So just so I'm clear, when you referred earlier to stakeholder feedback, you were talking about feedback from European officers at the bank.
So, as Mr. Sethi said, Mr. Long, manager is obliged to get feedback from a range of stakeholders. So that would be GIB, my business that I support. It would be from compliance colleagues, contemporaries, peers. It's a range of feedback from different people.
Well, I just want to be clear, because I took your answer earlier to be suggesting that you believe Mr. Long's assessment was influenced by stakeholder feedback.
Yes.
And you are implicitly suggesting, I thought, the stakeholder feedback was based on your nationality. Now, I want to be clear, are you talking about GIB or are you talking about people like Mr. de Groot and Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Long and people of that sort?
So, in relation to the 365, I think I was subject to both, sir. In relation to the 365, etc., and my interactions with Islamic banking, it would have come from GIB. I do think there was an element of this new global head, as they call it, the term in the organisation, making noise and upsetting the apple cart. And I do think had I been a European making those kind of, it would have been handled differently.
Thank you.
Where is your evidence that Mr. Long was influenced by some racially discriminatory feedback from the senior compliance managers, the white middle-aged men that we described them as? And where's the evidence that he was influenced by racially discriminatory feedback from GIB? Where was it?
It's in the bank's processes in terms of Mr. Long is supposed to take feedback, as you rightly pointed out, from various stakeholders. The stakeholders he would have sought feedback from were the people that concern me in relation to this claim. Now, if there was...
Now, hold on.
You asked me about evidence. Can I finish my answer, please?
Yes. Is it in the bundle?
Can I finish my answer?
Is it in the bundle?
You haven't disclosed it, so no.
Right, so there's no evidence in the bundle. Does anybody give any witness evidence about any oral communication or even any other undisclosed documentary communication evidencing some kind of influence either from your senior middle-class white compliance managers or GIB management to Mr. Long?
You're talking about the 9...
Where's the evidence of the influence on Mr. Long, Mr. Mahmood? Are you speculating?
No.
So where's the evidence?
The evidence for me is the fact that this had never been an issue
Yes.
in the year.
Yes.
It suddenly popped up.
Yes.
Mr. Long actually made reference to some of these matters.
in the performance rating?
No, in our discussion. So it's not just a document, we have a discussion as well. Because this was new, I said, what's that all about?
What, Mr. Long said to you that these other individuals have racist intent?
You know he didn't.
Well, no, I'm asking you.
No, he did not, sir.
Right, so where is the evidence that Mr. Long was influenced by some racial, based on either you not being a Caucasian white, or because of you being a British Asian who's apparently relinquished Pakistani heritage? Where's the evidence that anything, any mindset of that kind from any other quarters was brought to bear on Mr. Long in his assessment of your performance?
Well, as there's been no disclosure, the evidence is in my testimony here, which is under oath. And my testimony here, to that effect, is that Mr. Long, during my performance meeting, told me that stakeholder feedback from GIB wasn't great.
We agree with that.
Yeah. And he told me that stakeholder feedback, I'd really upset Mr. Phoebe, he used stronger language than that. I'd really upset Mr. Phoebe and Mr. de Groot and various others in compliance management with regards to this 365 feedback.
And that probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody either.
So that's my evidence, sir. That's what he said to me in my performance management.
But where's the racial element? Where's the evidence of the racial element? How on earth is anybody to draw any inference that it's not other than the manner in which you proceeded with these matters, it's actually you not being a Caucasian and a not of white skin, or you having a British Asian status with a relinquishing of your Pakistani heritage? Where is it?
I believe I've answered your question
Have
already.
you?
And yeah, you haven't disclosed it, and
So your answer is we haven't disclosed it. Is that your answer?
well, if there was written, so okay, let's just go into.
Is that your answer?
Let me give you my answer. Let's go into the detail of it, sir. In terms of that particular conversation, because I asked, I said, what was the feedback from GIB? He could not point me to anything. He could not point me to any emails. He could not point me to any particular individual or any specific instances. The only specific instance that came up in that meeting was in relation to the way I'd done the 365. I delivered the 365. Not the way I delivered. Let me correct. The reaction to the 365.
Let's see what the feedback on this particular performance review process was from the GIB business unit. It comes from Rehan Sheikh. It's at page 4765. Do you want to have a moment to remind yourself what it says?
I'm just scrolling down to it.
Good.
Yes, thank you. I've read it, sir. Mr. Shakes, at least.
Yeah. Now, up until the words as a development feedback, you would accept that he's provided reasonably positive, balanced feedback there?
I'd say it was positive, yes.
All right. Let's read on from as a development feedback, shall we? As a development feedback, I would say that Shiraz can be a bit impulsive at times. I would advise Shiraz to avoid rushing to conclusions without having fully assessed the merits or demerits of the matter at hand. He would also need to sharpen his people management skills to strike a balance in being assertive whilst avoiding confrontations. In this way, he will improve his standing in the organisation, encouraging teamwork in IB and acceptability to his point of view. All in, Shiraz has had a good start and has made a great progress this year. Look forward to his continued contribution in 2019 to help SADC embed key deliverables of compliance within Islamic. So that is the input into your performance rating that Mr. Sheikh provided. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
That is the evidence before this court as to what influence Mr. Sheikh had on your performance rating, other than your speculative suggestion that there's something else out there.
I'm actually quite dumbstruck because because looking at this document now,
Yes?
you're saying I got feedback from Mr. Sheikh and Kashif Khan and that's it. That's not a complete document. There's no way you're going to do a performance review with just two people giving feedback. That's just not how the bank works. So, yeah, I question the veracity of this document. It's not complete.
Right. What we see in the document, you do not question the veracity of. Is that right?
In terms of the two statements there,
Yeah.
no. When I say
And
veracity,
you saw this document at the time, didn't you?
no, I saw a complete document. I did not see just this document.
You're suggesting the document has more pages than we see here.
I'm suggesting that there
Did you
was,
see a document which was longer than the one we see here at the time, Mr. Mahmood?
I saw a document with feedback from more individuals.
Right. And who would those individuals be, Mr. Mahmood?
I would have to go back and check. I can't recall off the top of my head. It's 2018, which is
All right. Well, then we can't take that any further, can we? Now, Mr. Long says he decided not to give you a rating of 2C to reflect the problems that you had caused in the way and manner you communicated with colleagues. Now, this has been a consistent theme, hasn't it? At least from your manager's perception. Yeah? What you understood how you understood your manager perceived you.
no.
This didn't come as a surprise to you in your 2018 performance review.
Very much did.
I think you try and suggest that the separate issue of the variable remuneration that you received consequent upon this rating is also an act of discrimination. But you agree, don't you, that that's just a consequence, it's just standard practice. The decision as to how much variable compensation to award is simply a consequence of the rating. Do you agree? It's not a separate unlawful act of discrimination.
I can't comment because I've never been in, as your client has pointed out, I've not been in a management position and not been able to do a review, so
I
I
see.
don't know what the decision-making process is as part of that.
Okay. Now, you did challenge the 2C rating with Mr. Long, didn't you?
I was surprised by it and I did speak to him about it, yes.
So just before we come to that, in terms of individuals who had their annual variable compensation award reduced, there's a document at page 1861 You were not the only one, were you, who had a downward adjustment to your variable and other compensation? That's right, isn't it?
Well, now you're showing me this document, it appears not, but I wasn't privy to that at the time.
Not my question, Mr. Mahmood. We'd go a lot faster. You'd spend less time where you are sitting right now if you just focus on the question. You were not the only person, were you, who had their remuneration downgraded as a result of 2018 performance assessment. Chali Kolala also experienced similar. Do you see that?
I do so.
And do you know anything of Chali Kolala's race?
African, I believe. I don't know. I think she's a black lady. I don't know. I don't really know her or him. But I think it's a girl.
Okay. Now, Mr. Long says that you challenged the 2C rating. That when you challenged the 2C rating, you reiterated to him that you considered that you should have had a 1A rating. That's right, isn't it? Right or wrong?
I believe I would have, yeah, probably.
So you initially assessed yourself 1A like you did the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
You received this detailed appraisal document.
Yep.
You challenged it, and you challenged it on the basis that you've got this wrong, I'm a 1A. I may be simplifying matters, but that's...
No,
that's
I didn't
right.
challenge just on that single ground alone.
No, you challenged the rating. When you spoke to Mr. Long after receiving this rating, you said, I deserve a 1A. That was your position, wasn't it? With him.
It was wider than that, but yes, I challenged my rating and other issues around that.
Yeah, and you maintained the 1A it should have been scored as, yes?
I queried why it wasn't.
Why it wasn't rated as 1A.
Yes.
Thank you. And if you did query to him why it wasn't rated as 1A, surely he would have reiterated to you the reasons that he'd set out in writing in the performance review. What do you say he said in response to your challenge?
Well, he couldn't answer my query as to why one person who, over the course of a year, had implemented single-handedly a global freight compliance framework without any support. So there were a whole host. There was a detailed conversation. I can go into all of it, but it wasn't just a black and white, as you say. There was a lot going on there, and it wasn't so much I'm entitled to a 1A, because we'd had a conversation the year before where I said, okay, how do I get to a 1? And he told me I felt I'd met those criteria, so we had a follow-up conversation following the performance review.
Come along, Mr. Mahmood. Even on this occasion, in order to justify his rating, in order to justify the content of his comments in the performance review document, those matters will have been discussed with you. The manner of your communicating with colleagues recently at that time influenced your rating.
Oh, absolutely. And I said, where has this come from? Because it was never an issue during the year, so of course we discussed
that discussion was a discussion of some length, was it?
I can't recall the precise time.
How long did you spend talking about it?
I don't know. It was a detailed discussion.
Detailed discussion. Thank you. Now, on the 28th of February, we know that your line manager relayed your feedback on Mr. Long's rating to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. de Groot. And we see that at page 2029. And I believe the document starts at 2028 at the bottom. So at 06:23 on the 28th of February, Mr. Long writes to these two more senior people about two individuals' ratings that he had made decisions on. One was somebody called Felix, and the second was you. Do you see that?
Just going through it now.
you read that on page 2029?
Just the last bullet point. I've read it now. Thank you.
So we're almost living this in real time, Mr. Mahmood. So on the, be very clear for the record, on this date, which is now the 28th of February 2019, the line manager is saying to Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. de Groot, 1, 2, 3 main bullet points. Despite my attempts at managing his expectations, he simply views himself as a 1A. Bullet point number 1. Bullet point number 2. We have had a long discussion today, and I've really tried to recalibrate his mindset that a 2 is not a good performance rating. I will continue, thirdly, to engage with him on this and advise what he can do on to get to a 1. But when you have some time, I would appreciate if you could each have a conversation with him on how you view 1 versus 2 performance rating. Okay? Now, in terms of the second point there, you understand the point that was being made there, that a 2 is not a bad rating.
Yes. Now,
Mr. Long also says that he sent this feedback to Mr. Phoebe, a third person, at 2030. So if I ask you to go to page 2030, please. Next page. And let's hear how Mr. Phoebe replied. He replies with, I guess my thoughts are Shiraz needs to grow up if he thinks he is a 1A. He's not, and expending management time to indulge him is counterproductive to how people will regard him. He has had people spend an enormous amount of energy on his errors in the last 12 to 15 months. You may not agree with that assessment, but that was the assessment of Mr. Phoebe. The errors that Mr. Phoebe is here referring to, because you've had an opportunity to look at all these documents now, I'm sure, is the way you communicated with colleagues, isn't it?
I have no idea because I asked when.
Yeah. I accept you're not copied in on this communication.
No.
But your understanding today is that what Mr. Phoebe is referring to there, in terms of the errors and the enormous amount of energy on his errors in the last 12 to 15 months, are those matters that I've been dealing with you, asking questions about, such as the HKMA matter, the 365 review, and other ways in which you've been interacting with the GIB.
Yes, I'd like to be really clear on this point.
Oh, yes, please.
I have, apart from 2 errors, which he calls errors, 365 was not an error, HKMA, debatable. Apart from that, I have no idea what he or anyone else is talking about in terms of errors, because in terms of specific errors, nothing was ever brought to my attention. It was a generic, overarching errors.
And you implicate Mr. Phoebe, don't you, in the racist conspiracy, don't you?
I think Mr. Phoebe, when he looks at me growing up and indulging me, did have some sort of bias in relation to his perception of me, yes.
Right. So let's all be very clear on this. So who are the people here that we're looking at who've got a racist, who are part of the racist conspiracy towards you? Are we talking about, so you said you confirm Mr. Phoebe, are we talking about Mr. de Groot? You certainly say that he informally reprimanded you about the 365 feedback as an act of nationality discrimination at issue 10.1 of the list of issues. So I'm assuming, therefore, you are saying that Mr. de Groot was racist towards you. Pardon?
10.1.
Yes.
And you're talking about the reprimand.
Yes. So he's in on it, is he? He's in on the racist conspiracy.
I believe as...
It's a yes or no. I just want to know. Yes or no. Right. So we've got Mr. DeGroot. What about Mr. O'Donnell? Yes or no?
Don't know Mr. O'Donnell well enough, but yes.
Don't know him well enough, but yes. No, okay. Well,
Based
yes.
on
If yes is the answer, that's fine. You've answered the question.
Based on a particular act, yes.
Right. And of course, you say Mr. Long as well, your line manager.
Yes.
And just while we're at it on the shopping list of people, you're saying, I think, also Mr. Sheikh and Mr. I haven't talked about members of GIB yet, but within members of GIB, are you saying all of them?
In terms of the management team, I would say that the two ringleaders were Mr. Sheikh and Mr. Akbar, and there were Mr. Alawala, Khurram Halal, and Alias Hassan Ali from time to time.
Right, so 5 members of GIB business unit, you say, are part of the racist conspiracy. Yes?
I would say that they also did not like the fact that I was a British Pakistani.
I think your answer is yes, isn't it?
Well, no, the racist conspiracy is your term. I'm just saying I think they suffered from...
Yes. Okay. I think I understand we understand what. Anybody else?
Well, it depends, Mr.
Depends on what? All I want to know is what your case
It
is.
depends on perception. So look, I've never been a victim as such. When I entered into GIB, there was a focus, which is recorded in the document, where my Britishness was constantly on the floor.
I just want to know names, please, Mr. Mahmood. You'll have an opportunity to be re-examined and argue your case later.
I'm not arguing my case. I'm answering a question.
I want a list of names. Any other names I've left out?
In the management team, no, apart from those individuals.
In the GIB management team?
Yes.
And I think I've dealt with all the individuals in compliance, is that right?
From memory, yes, as far as I can recall.
And just to reconfirm, in compliance, Tom Phoebe, the line manager, Mr. DeGroot, Mr. O'Donnell. 4 people. Anybody else? Now's your opportunity.
As far as I can recall, yes, at this moment in time.
So we've got 4 people in compliance, 4 people in GIB. 5 in GIB, beg your pardon. Right, 9 people. Nobody else. I need to know, I need to understand who
Not
your
that I'm
target is.
aware of.
Not that you're aware of, not that your case is. Okay, that's good, thank you. Right. Now, let's move on to another short matter, which, Your Honour, I think I can deal with before the lunch adjournment. And that's a matter of the BMA review. Now, as you understand it, the Business Model Analytics team, the BMA team, is responsible for continually and proactively identifying conduct-related risks across the bank's business, correct?
Correct.
And it reviews the bank's business models end-to-end, evaluates control effectiveness in order to identify latent dependencies or vulnerabilities which exist.
If that's what they say, I have no reason.
No reason to dispute that.
Yeah.
Now, as I understand it, a review was commenced by BMA into the GIB business unit.
Yes,
And that review came about at your request, is that right?
it did.
Did you seek to inform and consult with, let's say, your line manager before requesting BMA to conduct a review?
Yes, he was aware.
Bear with me for a moment. Now on June around June of 2019, we know that the business model analysis team spoke with HR, who then became aware for the first time, according to Ms. Sal Najjar, that they were undertaking this review. So you didn't discuss it with anybody. You say you discussed it with Mr. Long, but you didn't discuss it with anybody else before, in your case, they undertook the review. Is that right?
I was not permitted to.
Just wanted to know. I didn't ask whether you were permitted to. It's whether you discussed it with anyone else. I think you understood the question.
Just Mr. Long.
Thank you. That's the answer to the question. Or an answer. Now, do you accept that there is any validity to the point that the reason for the number of Pakistanis in the GIB team was because the talent pool for Islamic banking expertise in the United Arab Emirates is drawn heavily from Pakistan?
No, I don't accept that.
Again, that's an explanation. It may not be an excuse, but it's an explanation as to why it is made up in the way in which it is.
It can be put forward as an explanation.
Right. And another explanation is that geographically Pakistan is closer than other Islamic banking markets such as Malaysia and the United Kingdom. Is that another viable explanation?
That's an explanation that could be put forward.
Is it a viable explanation?
To say that the lack of diversity was just because Pakistan is close.
I didn't say just. Is it an explanation? Is it a genuine factor
I think
to explain?
it could be put forward as a explanation.
I see. Thank you. Now, do you accept that it was a certain Mr. Crispian Cuss that concluded a review, a BMA review, and send the results of that to HR? Were you aware of that?
I was aware that Mr. Cuss undertook the review. I did not know that he'd sent anything to HR. Didn't know he was talking to HR.
You know the outcome though, don't you?
Of what?
The review.
No, the report was never shared with me. Just
Well,
my
you'll hear
mind.
from HR that the results were very positive. Although there were some complaints about the compliance function. Do you accept that? You'll have seen the report. It's in the bundle.
I'd have to go to it and have a look.
Right. It's at 7360. Do you want to remind yourself of that document?
Well, so
7360 through to 7409.
The document seems to be a survey, not a report. You need to take the witness to a report.
Yes, the background, Judge, is that this then, the actual draft BMA report gets discussed and becomes a subject of the infamous 5 August meeting that we're going to come on to. This is the survey results. You're absolutely right. And
Just to save the plot time, can you tell me what pages where these complaints are? It's quite a long survey and I'm scrolling through it. Just be helpful to go to the right bits.
yes, I mean, if you go to page 7372,
7372. Okay.
the survey results as to whether there are specific concerns around the business's governance.
Okay.
There are
1920.
24 issues, and the answers are set out there.
So the compliance one, I presume, is 20, yes? You're referring to?
Yes, so for example, if you look at item 20, there are no specific concerns. However, compliance function needs to have a better understanding and work as a partner. So the point I'm making at this stage is that you asked the BMA to conduct an independent or their own survey, their own review. They conduct a review. They seem to come to a very similar conclusion to what's going on with others' view of compliance not partnering effectively with the business unit. Compliance function needs to have a better understanding and work as a partner. Let's go to 7379.
I'm sorry, I'm just concerned, Ms. Anderson, this page 7372, seems to be a table of 24 responses, isn't it?
Yes.
One of which refers to compliance. So that's a response to people who've been surveyed. It's not BMA's view, is it?
On 737, indeed. It's a survey response.
Can I just ask-
7379 has more and shows the other concerns about compliance. Just so you understand, Judge, it's a responses to a confidential survey.
Yeah, but it's not BMA's view.
No, it's not their conclusion. That comes later. At the moment, these are results of a survey, a confidential survey conducted by the BMA team. But we see that when concerns are raised, we can look at 19 and 20 on page 7379, for example. You'll recall, Judge, that this witness made the request to BMA because he wished he had a concern about the lack of diversity in the GIB
Yes.
business unit.
Well, I understand that, but
The survey results don't disclose, do they, Mr. Mahmood, any concerns relating to the reason why you wanted the BMA to take this process?
There's a correction
on.
to what you just said, sir.
Can you just answer my question first? The question is, you wanted, well, there's two questions. You requested the BMA to get involved and conduct this process, this review, because of your concerns about lack of diversity in the GIB business unit, correct?
No.
Okay. Did you not mention anything of the sort to the BMA?
I contacted the BMA to undertake a review of conduct within GIB. That's part of their responsibility. And as part of that review, I mentioned diversity and the bullying that certain staff were being subjected to, and as a result.
Whatever you asked BMA to look into in relation to diversity, they did not come back with any results. Let's deal with the results at the moment, which turn on the matter, which relate to the matter. Is that right?
Well, I can't comment, Mr.
Well, the results are here.
Well, no, but somewhat amazingly, I commissioned the conduct review, and I never got the report. So the first time I'm ever seen it is when you've done disclosure. So I've not read the report, I've not received the report, even though I was the person that requested the report to be conducted.
Your own witness statement says, paragraph 99, on 10 February 2019, I contacted the BMA team in Singapore. The BMA team review business through a conduct lens, as conduct is a regulatory theme which the FCA, SCB's lead regulator, places significant focus on. I contacted the BMA team to ask them to assist with the resolution of the Sharia conflict of interest, as management refusal to resolve a conflict of interest is classified as a conduct issue. I also raised concerns about the culture of the Islamic banking team and the bullying of European nationals. In particular, I raised concerns around the lack of diversity and the inclusion within the Islamic banking team, and in particular the fact that the team was almost entirely made up by people of Pakistani nationality. Now, the BMA review did not result, or rather the BMA results at this stage, so I'll deal with the review later. The BMA results were positive. They did not reveal concerns about a lack of diversity, did they?
When you say the results, what are you talking about?
This document that we're looking at.
Survey.
Yes, the survey results.
Well, asking people who are not diverse whether they think they are diverse is not a terribly useful exercise, I wouldn't think.
I suppose the reality is that the survey does not
That's
help
why
us.
I don't understand why we're spending so much time on the survey, because this is just 24 people's opinions.
But where there are opinions expressed that are negative, it is in relation to compliance's interaction and not partnering sufficiently with the businesses.
Not exclusively.
Not exclusively.
There was 1 out of 24 on the previous page and 2 out of 24 on this page.
Indeed.
Hardly.
I'm not going to belabor the point. It's part of the narrative, and I'll leave it there.
It seems unlikely you're going to finish this topic very quickly, is it? You've got to take them to the report, presumably.
Yes, I need to deal with how the draft report was handled, but I'm trying to deal with matters chronologically, so we're going to come back to it. But now is an appropriate time to break.
Right. We'll adjourn until 2 p.m. Same rules apply, Mr. Mahmood. Keep your own counsel. Don't speak to anybody about the case.
Yes.
Thank you.
All rise.